Yeah, so the furniture that viewers see on Survivor um, can be impactful. So here's what I'm wanting to say about that. I don't know if Wendell built this bench that everybody sits on, or whether or not there were pieces of things that producers dropped into the set, which is camp, um, for effectiveness. Because as you can see, people, if you've noticed these things, people tend to sit where there is a place to sit that's somewhat comfortable because there aren't many choices. So when you have a bench on which most people can sit, it tends to be a focus. Well, that benefits production in all kinds of ways. They can mic it up. That bench could be mic'd. They can have stationary cameras. They can get footage, or they can anticipate being able to capture conversations much more easily than on the fly or walking around, or if people were to choose to sit in multiple locations every time. So I don't know if Wendell built that furniture or some other participants built that long bench, or whether producers put those things in to facilitate their filming. But what is for sure is that it's a benefit to us, the viewers, because we get to see more frequently those off the cuff interactions when people are just sitting down at camp. If there's no place to sit, it's harder to capture them all, even if you are a professional and have done this for 20 years, as have some of the crew. How about that scene between Ben and Tony at night? And Ben is not sure whether he should trust Tony because Tony blindsided him. Obviously, he shouldn't trust Tony, but he might be able to in this particular instance because it's to Tony's benefit. But in the midst of the scene of them having this conversation, bird poops on Tony's arm. Something poops on Tony. Poop lands on Tony's arm. And Tony thinks it's a bird and he washes off in the sand. And so here we are at night where a bird poops on Tony. And the next morning, Tony becomes the bird and builds a nest, climbs up a tree. So I'm sure some of you would ask what I would do were I in Michelle's position, in possession of that 50-50 advantage. And would I give it to Jeremy when Jeremy had been such a close ally? Well, in this case, where I thought that it was so likely that Jeremy would be voted out, and that's how Michelle perceived things, I would have to consider the likely value to me of maintaining the 50-50. That's a really, really tough thing to do. Because having someone on your side, remaining aligned with someone you were close with, like she feels she is with Jeremy, versus what value that advantage has anyway. I don't know if you remember in earlier recaps, I've talked about the idea that, well, is a 50-50 an advantage? Because if you rely on it, it's only 50-50. It could cause you to act with more confidence or in a particular way that you don't have protection from. So I don't know whether I would have given it or not. It's one of those things that would come down to all of the dynamics and much more subtlety in the moment. There's value in what it communicates to Jeremy in the case that he doesn't get voted out. There may be more value to the chance of him staying in the game by using that 50-50 than to my having it to take a chance if I felt like maybe I needed to take a chance in some later tribal council. See what I mean? There's a balance of how valuable that actual advantage is anyway. And I'm not going to criticize Michelle for having given it to Jeremy. And in fact, now that he is still in the game, maybe he'll give it back to her. Maybe either of them might use it at some time. It's not so certain advantageous to use that thing. So I think it was an okay decision, and I think it has resulted in the possibility that the bond between Jeremy and Michelle can continue. To what end, given the current dynamics of all of the players at this point, I'm not sure. They're not looking very strong. But at least, you never know, at least they're there to continue to play. There's a lot in this tribal council that people who have watched this game for years can glean about the social dynamics required to be effective. I've talked a lot in this recap about this week's recap about how Ben's gameplay is pretty poor at this point, and how he appears to me kind of depleted, exhausted, stressed, whatever those things are that are causing him to over emotionally react and make poor choices. Well, Tony exploits that in Tribal Council and kind of plays Ben, telling him that I think they're voting for Sarah, and trying to get him to do what Tony wants him to do. There's that kind of manipulation, influence, whatever you want to call it, that the effective player, and I've talked about that in this week's replay, Tony being such an effective player, wields skillfully. But there's also the perspective people have on how we're playing. And as they watch Denise shut down Jeremy and refuse to talk, refuse to engage, just say, no, I don't need to. And Jeremy kind of almost threatening back. Remember, you only have that immunity this 1 week. These kinds of social dynamics aren't typical of real life interactions. People are rarely that direct, that honest, that immediate with their confrontations and responses. So it's uncomfortable for someone who hasn't prepared to play the game well to engage in these ways. But it's necessary for that good player to be prepared to go head to head. It was great of Denise. If Denise felt like expressing an answer to a question of Tony's or of Jeremy's, or to engaging with him would be to her detriment, then just saying, no, I'm not going to talk, might have been the best choice of all. She had immunity. There's nothing he could do. She probably thought he was going. But regardless, there's no harm to not saying something compared with saying something that might then come back to haunt you. All of these social dynamics, they appear or they may sound, as I'm describing them, not so important in the bigger picture, whatever, but it is these subtleties and how they pan out from which you can gather what is needed to be the best survivor player anybody could be. So also in this week's recap, I talked about the trend that in recent seasons where whispering at Tribal Council has become more common and more impactful. And the difference between the footage of Tribal Council participants whispering to one another versus Probst questioning each of the Tribal Council participants is one that I'm thinking you might be wondering about. So, is there more information exposed? Is it more exposed in a more interesting way when Probst questions participants? Or are you able to see the dynamics of what's going on when you watch all the whispering that happens while Jeff just kind of sits and waits for them to finish the whispering? So my take on it is this. I don't think Jeff can question people about what is happening in real time for a couple of reasons. Jeff's experience in the game is zero. All Jeff has had is observation of the game. And in observing the game, Probst knows enough to know that anything can happen at any time. So as a producer, letting things happen leaves the opportunity for something interesting, something powerful, something crazy to happen that would make a good insert into the final edit. That said, the game is also unfolding in the midst of that whispering. It's happening right then. So Jeff isn't as prepared to ask questions about, well, what do you think now that this one said that to you? And what his interfering then would make him potentially too impactful to what's actually going on in the game for it to be of interest to me. I liked some of Jeff's questions at Tribal Council. I always have enjoyed whether or not the participants would answer him honestly, even if it was to their detriment. Of course, they shouldn't, but many people just can't think quickly enough to respond in ways that would benefit them. But I think his questioning people about what they've whispered and then going to the person they whispered to and saying, well, how did you take that, would slow down the dynamic. They don't have time to expose enough of that. And I think it would be even less fulfilling than is looking at them whispering and not being able to hear all of what they're saying. That's my take on whispering. 80% of you who are listening to these videos have not subscribed to my channel. Please subscribe. Just hit the subscription button and hit the notification button, and you'll be informed when I have another video up for you to listen to. After you've subscribed, comment. Comment positively. Comment negatively. No holds barred. Just say what you're thinking. That's what will make our exchange even more valuable. As I'm able, I'll create new videos responsive to that commentary. So like away, or dislike, on that rare occasion you may feel the need to do so. But either way, thank you.